Hello there folks, this is Ferengi on board here. Welcome to my YouTube channel, a place where I present different topics, different ideas, different subjects and provide answers to questions that people may find a bit more difficult to answer. And there are a lot of people who are simply not introspective enough or are for some reason afraid of being or becoming like that. And well, there are those people who simply prefer being given the answer instead of actually doing too much work. Whatever and regardless of the situation, I prefer diving deep into different topics and aspects and just provide my answer to different things that people may not be introspective enough. Now, the topic of this video would be trauma, and I don't know how much I will dive into it, but the point is, I was interested in, well, I suddenly came up with an idea to discuss about school trauma. Now, trauma is a set of events that happens in a certain, well, in a person's life throughout their existence, and usually the most affecting ones are the ones that happen in childhood, because subconsciously most people will keep those. Now, traumas in a way are something that, one way or another, they block the development of a certain person, and they may actually, through those blockages, inhibit the person's development. So, psychology presents evolution as 5 stages, and irrespective of these stages, there are certain blockages that can occur, and when these blockages occur, the person simply ceases to develop in a certain way. Now, that is one reason, because this is to take into account. Okay, when this kind of blockage happens, okay, you can actually end up seeing adults with still a mentality, or let's say a thinking pattern or a thinking way of children. Now, why that happens is because in their childhood they've been abused enough that a part of their child wasn't simply dissolved. Because what I feel is that when each stage develops, they develop to a certain let's say levels, out of which then it kind of dissolves. Okay, it doesn't disappear entirely from your existence, from your backbone, from like the pillars of your existence, but it simply no longer becomes that important because it fully developed. Okay, and if it is not fully developed, it is just like one of those programs whose installation is a bit problematic, like something went wrong. It still works, but it's not as it should, so that's kind of problematic in a way, because you never know when to expect certain things. And these little events in people's lives, especially in childhood, can trigger a lot of responses. Okay, like body related responses. Okay, the emotional, the psychological aspects, okay, can induce a lot of let's say situations, or well, let's still call them responses. Okay, they can be development of different patterns like narcissism or sociopathy, or well, some people would say psychopathy, but that's not quite the case, since science says that you're either born a psychopath or you're not one. You may have probably a bit of psychopathic traits, but I don't believe in psychopathic traits, because psychopathy is oddly and wrongly presented in how can I say, in television tropes. And it is presented like that because, in a way, from a spiritual standpoint, those tropes actually help in purging different things. Now, why psychopaths are very tempting, for example, is still related to traumas in a way. Why? Because the idea of abandonment, the idea of not being given the care and the attention that one needs, simply builds a lot of uselessness, a sense of lethargy emotionally and psychologically in a certain person. And the more they feed this burden, the more useless they think they are, and the lower their vibration goes. Now, the lower their vibration goes, different other manifestations trigger, like for example an idea of wanting to be killed or wanting to be abused, usually abused. And many people end up in having a lot of fantasies about being abused, and well, the industry of pornography actually thrives on this idea of abuse. And I'm not talking about the idea of you know fetishes and the such. Literally each and every cam girl or cam guy or people who do porn and they post it on the internet, whatever you're seeing there is traumas. Okay, it's not that those people finally realize that they can actually make a lot of money just by doing basic things like sexuality and not necessarily even nudity. Some girls may actually make a lot of money without becoming naked. It's just that they film themselves. It's also another point that the vibration that they draw is something that's not gonna be necessarily good. And I actually made a video about cam people, but the point about that is they are also cleansers, because they draw a lot of the the awkward energies that people reside and are affected by when in those low states of existence, okay, in their high state of emotional drama that they have and they keep feeding. Because every time you remember something, you have to understand you remember a contorted, let's say actually distorted version of that, because you always remember what was the last thing you actually thought about that previous thing. Now, a trauma is basically any type of event that causes different negative emotions within a person, particularly feelings of hopelessness and uselessness, because people do a lot of little punishments like taking away favorite toys, denying children different things. Now, when these actually happen, these are little traumas. And one big secret to say is that in many situations, when you speak to people, you're technically gonna speak and address yourself to their own traumas, not to the person themselves. Because so many people invest in these little traumas that they actually become themselves. Okay, that is how karma is actually created. Okay, because karma is memory, and well, karma is actually bad when it becomes a vicious cycle. It becomes a repetitive aspect because you feed so much of your past into your so-called future. There is no such thing as future, past and present. These are just needed for the mind to work. You need to understand the idea of a past, of a present and a future, because your mind requires such a logic. But beyond the physicality, there is no such thing as time as we know it. And I kind of prefer keeping to that and to as much of a cosmic consciousness as I can. Now, the point about traumas is that these are things that have happened in the past, okay? And the more you think about those, is the more you actually allow them to influence you throughout your future. When your past becomes your future, then is, what can be actually called karma, because you're letting your memory become your future. Okay, everything that happens, it happened to you. It would be much wiser if you actually say it happened for you, because it was a lesson. And spiritually speaking, in order to develop and reach a certain level of wisdom and understanding, you have to go through at least a certain amount of at least a certain amount of abuse, because that is what actually opens different things within you. And probably I will be one of the few people who actually does not view psychopaths and sociopaths as broken people. They are actually beings, they are actually people who have been open towards different portals of their existence. There are thousands of dimensions of the mind, and people most likely use only one or two, and they become fully attached to that, especially when there is so much living in this idea that we have a reputation, we need to get subscribers, we need to have all sort of these dependencies that people become accustomed to, and they think that if they don't have them, their life simply sucks. There's all these people who hate themselves because they don't look as well as those people they see in photos. But hey, wake up to this life. We are living in the age of technology in which everything can actually be improved. If you look like hell, it doesn't mean that through technology you cannot be made to actually look nice, or at least through the right amount of makeup and all sorts of things like that. But the point is, all these things actually go on and on and on, and trauma is also a continuous process in a way. It is a continuous process because you're constantly feeding it consciously and or subconsciously, and you're just improving it. And supposing something actually happens to you, every time you think of it, you're gonna make it feel as if it's been worse and worse, and you're actually gonna make it worse and worse, and basically from something almost irrelevant, you're gonna turn into a like really great trauma, okay? And all these traumatized people who have untrained minds and untrained emotional system, they enter all sorts of positions in society, and those people whom I actually refer to as NPCs, because these NPCs, they are only aware of that little coding that allows them just to live, and they haven't got an awareness that goes beyond just that. Well, these are actually the helpers, okay? These traumatized beings agreed to go through that level of trauma so that they actually allow the players, who are the people who go through their own awakening, they allow the players to actually understand life in a certain way. Yes, sure, it is difficult to live around these people, and believe me, I actually know. I live with a grandmother who actually has a passion to accuse me of all sorts of things that happen to her, and I don't even know what she means, but it's always my fault and things like that. And the point about this is very simple. Their purpose is to remind you that, well, you're not truly authentic. They are authentic. Yes, you might fool yourself that those people are lying and they are deceiving, but that is their coding. To the awareness level that they have, they are truly authentic because they have a simple code, okay? You're also authentic when you lie and when you deceive because it is part of yourself, okay? Lying, deceiving, killing, abusing others, it is part of the code of consciousness, okay? You shouldn't be running away from those. Now again, in society, it doesn't mean that you should feel free to actually make use of those, but the point is, you shouldn't feel bad if such things or fantasies lie in your head, because most likely those don't even belong to you, or even if you created and nurtured them, they are part of yourself, they are part of your coding, and you have become more aware of that. People who will call you mind broken, they will call you like that, but you have to understand that the truth will never find itself in your possession by being taught to you by others, okay? The truth can only be in your possession when you learn it, okay? Any person or being or whatever that teaches other people the so-called truth, they are nothing else than little authoritarians, let's say like that, okay? They are nothing else than little tyrants, and tyrants are also born because of trauma and an inability to contain that trauma and actually release it and say, okay, this has happened to me, let's see what's the lesson beyond that. And of course there are different things and reasons why most people don't go beyond their traumas. It's because nothing happens in this universe without its own permission. So those people will remain in traumas because they have so many lessons to teach different people. Okay, the players have to go through their awakening, and they have to really go through understanding what things are and how things are, okay? Because you're gonna be constantly reminded that you're not truly authentic. Those people, the NPCs, for the level of awareness that they have, which is that of a machine, let's say, or a robot, okay, for that level of awareness, they are truly authentic because they stick to their code 100%. Being negative, moaning, complaining, creating traumas and the such, it's the most they can. So you simply shouldn't be spending time thinking about those, okay? And you have to understand that those people with traumas actually are spread worldwide because they will reach all sorts of positions. When they get into politics, if they get into the judicial system, if they get into whatever place, like even teachers, okay, you have to understand that those people are simply governed by their traumas. So whatever decision, whatever aspect they're gonna make, their traumas are actually gonna have a huge impact. That is why I will always reinforce the idea of psychological testing, because as of a standpoint, a personal standpoint, I simply wouldn't accept the idea of traumatized people in very important positions, like literally in any position, because you can't have a normal family if the parents are traumatized. we cannot have a normal judicial system if most of the judges are traumatized, okay? And removing traumas from the society and from the collective consciousness is a process that will take a long time and most likely cannot be achieved with the people of now, but can be achieved by, raising healthier, new generations that will live less in trauma, okay? But the point is, children have to be taught a bit about trauma, and the best way to do that is to actually take them through that, but also the idea is to teach them how to go beyond those, okay? They have to be taught the art of gratefulness, the art of gracefulness, and being graceful, yes, being graceful in life, okay, acting with a lot of grace, being grateful for the things that happen, and also being forgiving, especially to themselves, and through that towards the others, because the point is, you cannot teach someone something that they haven't experienced. Each and every person will understand things up to their own level of awareness and to their own level of experience. As a parent, one of your roles is to become deeply introspective and even communicate with the universe, because the child that you are going to have, they are just another player who most likely they are interested in learning things. Getting to know what your child has to experience through this life, okay? Because as a mother, you can actually communicate with your child even before they are fully brought into the physical realm, and understanding what their life purpose is as a parent actually helps them a lot, because in order to reach a certain level, okay, they have to go through certain traumas as well. So you have to traumatize them as parents, and later on as they grow you have to teach them how to forgive themselves, because if they go through school they will be taught all sorts of wild things like hating on their peers because they got greater grades, and they are brought in this world in the age of technology where there's social media and all sorts of mind poisoning and all sorts of ideas that they're never good enough. So the very simple point about this is that you have to take people through a journey through consciousness, just as my game's name tells, because something tells me this name hasn't actually been chosen by me. It actually came to my mind, and I'm starting to understand that there's actually a huge part to it beyond the perceptible that I have, okay, the perceptiveness that I have. So it's not about traumatizing people and traumatizing children as something that you must do. It's when you came to this life, you agree that certain things have to be experienced, but the idea of free will has it that you will forget what you chose to. That's what most sources say. This is not something that I'm fully sure of, but okay, some people might actually need this more than I, but okay. So unless children are taken through a certain level, at least a certain level of trauma, they cannot understand other things, because you have to understand that this universe is all about, or in a way it is about balance. You cannot understand more than your level of awareness, and through traumas you get to understand certain things. You get to understand ideas like you're over exaggerating things, you're not authentic to yourself because you're putting too much attention on things from the outside, okay? There are people who will hate you, there are people who will curse at you, there are different people, but you have to understand that you're dealing with their own traumas, not yourself. You're just welcoming those other traumas into your life, and you're suffering because of those as if they are your own. That is some great lesson that most people have to understand, and it is one of the pillars that differentiates a player who's still in the tutorial of life, okay, namely an NPC, and finally they have become a full-fledged player, right? Someone who's started their awakening journey, or most likely they are already deeply entrenched into that, so to speak. So you have to understand that in most situations what you're dealing with is the traumas of people, okay? The fact that they don't feel well is they have absorbed too much of that, and they haven't been trained how to release that, okay? And in school you will actually see that a lot, because the teachers that you will face most likely have been just like you. They have been through school and they have been disregarded by their parents and especially by their teacher. Now, I'm not saying that teachers are necessarily evil, is that with most people with untrained minds, their traumas are going to play a critical role. At the same time, other people's traumas can be a good teacher by itself, while at the same time it is an inhibitor because most teachers don't know exactly how to teach. They know that they have to transmit information, but they don't have the foundation. They don't have the foundation of didactics, because teaching is not just sharing some information, it's just teaching people how to learn. That is the most important thing, because nowadays information can easily be acquired. You don't have to teach people about this definition about physics or this definition about biology. You just have to teach them how to learn, and then they can simply learn and approach the topic in their own way. And this actually helps people develop and become much better, because they also develop their own mind and their own potential if they do things their own way instead of doing things one person's way. Because if you have people that act and think like a single person, it's like a whole race has the same features and characteristics of one single individual, which means there is no diversity. When you have no diversity in the face of many challenges, that race simply vanishes, because there is only one individual, right? When you have a society that all think at the same way, it is easy to rule, right? Because when people think the same way, when you find when you find an exploit regarding that one person's mentality, you have basically found an exploit to most of those people. Because even if they think in the same way, they think in the same way because they accept that, but to a certain little point, their uniqueness is still there, waiting to be, waiting to be plugged into and waiting to be experienced and manifested through. But in schools and classes, you can see that there are a lot of people who are traumatized, and children are traumatized by their own parents, and then they get into the hands of a teacher who also they have been traumatized at their own time. And if you spend some time and look at them, you'll see that some of these actually revel in the misery that there is within you as children. Why? Because they have been through that moment when they they definitely learned their lesson, because to their feeble mind they thought, okay, if I know the lesson, the teacher might say that I'm good, okay? And through their traumas and low self-esteem, they will believe that if someone tells them that they're good, well, they will finally feel a bit better. But you know how the shadow part of people works. It's always not good enough, and it's never enough, because once you have reached something that you really wanted, you always have to push even further. That's a way of punishing yourself more and more and diving yourself into even more trauma. And once teachers are now finally in the role of teachers, every time they see you that you desperately want to affirm yourself, well, it has so many of their traumas spring up, and to a certain point it actually gives them a sense of power. Now they are the one who can actually choose who to give a little power to, because the ones who's speaking actually has the power, right? As a teacher, you have the power to choose who to speak and present a lesson to, and that person, when they speak, they basically have the power because everyone else is listening to, right? But in the case of teachers and the perverted way that school works, the point is that it's always a reverse control. The teacher gives you control, but the idea is it is a reverse one. You should view my video on why the slave is the master and the master is the slave, because the teacher is not doing nothing else than instilling fear into you and insecurity, which you have been dealt enough of through your parents most likely, and your relatives and other friends of yours, and the teacher is doing nothing else than exploiting that, which again leads me to the fact of spiritual parasite entities. And there is a lot to discuss on this, so I'm not having teachers act as, or I'm not demonizing teachers, okay? Everything happens for people to experience and understand certain things in life, okay? So everything happens through a certain degree of spirituality as well. There will always be the so-called demons and parasitic entities whose purpose is to make sure that certain people will act in a certain way so that they teach others a certain other way. Everything is encrusted in the coding of the universe, and that is the reason why the universe won't ever allow things to happen that are outside of the code. Okay, although the code is very generous and always has thousands of possibilities that can happen, but everything is still stuck into those. If you are introspective enough and you can see and understand that code, you will understand how people or certain people can foresee different things. Okay, now enough about this video. I think I spoke quite a bit about that. It's more like a generalistic approach. It's not something that it's not a fully dive into the point. Okay, I'm just presenting these things as a means to help people become more introspective about themselves, and well, keep up doing the good work that you're doing. If you like the type of content that I'm creating, feel free to like and subscribe. Feel free to share with others so that together we can expand the consciousness and awareness of people. And well, until next time, you are loved and appreciated. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Become more introspective. Ferenc Jan Bord signing out.